Alright, okay, folks, we are looking at the next topic, which is international trade. Remember, we are still completing the last unit or section of the syllabus. Alright, so the one of the last few main topics we have here is international trade. So I'm going to take you through this topic and some of the important things that you are expected to know. Right, direct contributions and provided by government, and the purpose of it is to offset the operating costs of businesses. So we see here that contribution is going to businesses over a relatively long period of time, right? So this is called subsidies. Okay, this is called subsidy. The payment granted to workers who are made redundant or have to retire early. So this time we have a payment going to workers who are made redundant. Redundant here means your job is no longer required. So the organization is basically letting you go, as we say locally, or they are retiring you early, right? So this is known as severance benefit. Severance benefit, and this is a payment given to workers in this situation. Third question, final one, a type of direct tax that is levied on profits from the sale of a business, property, or land. So if a property, business, or land is sold at a profit, meaning more than what it's worth or the value of it, market value, what tax is paid on this amount? So this tax is known as capital gains tax. Capital gains tax. And it's a fitting term because here we are dealing with the sale of capital, property, land, business. This is all capital types. Alright, the gains here signify that you are selling the property and collecting extra, meaning the amount received for sale minus the value of the property will give you a profit. So if you made a profit on the sale of this capital, you are going to pay tax on that amount. Alright, so those are just three review questions to help you stay on point. I'm going to start now looking at our topic, international trade. Now, what is international trade? When countries buy goods and services from each other, we are talking about international trade. So we know that trading means buying and selling of goods and services, and that occurs between buyers and sellers, right, within a market situation. But of course, this market situation can extend to outside of your local area, meaning between countries, right? So here we have countries importing and exporting with each other, and we know that this is something that is very popular because many of the goods that we have and use as consumers are goods that are traded or bought from other countries that have it available, right? So international trade basically consists of trading among different countries in the world. And as they import and export, we see that this has led to great improvement in our standard of living because, as I said, we now have goods that we do not have provided here or produced here. For instance, we don't produce apples here, but we have that good available through trading with other countries. So that allows us to have access to more goods and services, which entails improving our standard of living. Alright, so when countries trade, there are two concepts here that we should be familiar with, absolute advantage and comparative advantage. Very simple to understand. Now, sometimes there are countries that are very good and efficient at producing something. So let's look at Grenada, for instance. We are very good and efficient at producing our spices, nutmeg, cocoa, right? And that has allowed us to be able to trade with other countries in the world and bring in a lot of profits or revenues, income, inflows into the country. So we have an absolute advantage there. However, countries also have to look at am I able as a country to produce and use the resources for this product more efficiently than for another product? So sometimes you have to give up um, using the resources for other goods and use it for something that you're more efficient or better at producing. So, gone are the days when we produced and traded bananas with other countries. Is it therefore possible that when we look at our comparative advantage, the resources, meaning the land, labor, and everything that we put into producing banana, is it more efficient to use those same resources and put it into cocoa, nutmeg, spices, etc.? Right? So countries decide based on whether they have an absolute advantage or comparative advantage, what good or service they are going to produce and trade. So if they have an absolute advantage, you'll find that they produce that good and then they sell it to other countries to bring in revenues. If they have a comparative advantage in a particular product, they would therefore decide which product would give them a greater opportunity in profiting, right? So they will determine the advantage, right? The opportunity cost advantage of trading with that product. So we have examples here, two countries, the USA and Japan. They are both manufacturers in the automobile industry. So we have here two examples. USA producing cars, 30 million, Japan 25 million. So we're looking at a given period. In relation to trucks, USA produces 10 million and Japan 2.5 million. So just by looking at the figures, we can see here that the USA has an absolute advantage in producing both cars and trucks. Why? Because they can produce more, meaning they have the resources to put towards producing these two products and producing it well, right? So that is an absolute advantage. Now, when you look at comparative advantage, you have to look at who is more efficient and whether the country is efficient at producing that item over there. So there are two products here. Is the USA more efficient at producing cars over trucks? Is Japan more efficient at producing cars over trucks? So how do we tell? Alright, some simple calculations, but the figures also will leave us to conclude. So when we look at the USA is 1.2 times better than Japan at producing cars, and we can see that in the figure because USA is producing 30 million, Japan is producing 25 million. So 30 divided by 25 gives you 1.2. So 1.2 more than Japan. So they have a comparative advantage over Japan in that product. And then they're 4 times better at producing trucks, right? And the same comparison applies. So in relation to Japan, we see here that Japan is probably better at producing cars, or not probably, they are, so they're more efficient and they will probably decide to divert their resources into doing, right? So how much, when we look at opportunity cost advantage now, we're saying how much of that actual value of resources that we have to use do we have to give up to produce another product? So if Japan has to produce cars over truck, how much cars do they have to give up to produce one truck? And the same figures would apply again. So Japan produces 25 million cars, 2.5 million trucks. Sorry for that spelling, I'll correct it. Right? And right, so 25 million divided by 2.5 million gives you 10 cars. So this tells us that for every one truck that Japan produces, they have to give up 10 cars. So would they prefer to use the resources to produce cars, sorry, or to produce truck? So it seems here that they have a better opportunity cost or an advantage towards using those resources to produce cars because they're producing much more as opposed to one truck, right? USA's opportunity cost is much lower than Japan. USA only gives up 3 cars to produce one truck. So USA can decide, okay, since Japan seems to be more efficient at producing cars, we're going to buy cars from Japan and we're going to focus on producing trucks. right? So it boils down to countries looking at the advantage, the opportunity cost advantage to them of using up the resources that they have to actually produce certain goods and services and weighing the advantage in terms of how efficient they are in producing those. All right, so why do countries trade with each other? Of course, it boils down to resources in many cases. So if you don't have a particular resource to produce, then you will not be able to produce, which means you'll have to trade. So if you don't have, let's say, we cannot make, we do not have enough forestry to create a thriving lumber industry that we can trade or sell to other countries. We therefore need to buy that from other countries. So we may buy lumber from Guyana, for instance, right? We lack certain mineral resources. So therefore that limits us from producing certain things. So therefore we have to trade with other countries for that. It also goes back to capital and technology. If you don't have the equipment, the capital, the machinery to do the task, you have to trade. So, for instance, Grenada has done the research and say, okay, we found oil in our area, but do we have the technology and the capital to actually do the mining? No, we don't. So we have to trade again with countries that will be able to provide certain goods and services, right, to do so. Then special skills are lacking, right? So again, let's go back to the same oil mining. If we don't have the skills, the labor force to do the task, then we have to trade, right, in order for that to be produced. Climatic conditions are different in different parts of the world, and that affects agriculture, that affects soil conditions, that affects the whole weather pattern and how things are able to grow. So our industry, agricultural industry, farming, um, and even other industries that depend on that have an impact on the climatic or is affected by the climatic condition, right, um, can move countries into trading rather than producing the good themselves. Then we have differences in the cost of production. We talked already about how efficient it is to produce within a country certain types of goods and who has absolute advantage over the other. So countries will look at that difference and see whether or not they should produce or trade. Lack of quantity and quality of local goods. So if we don't have the quality, then we have to trade with other countries to get that quality that we need or quantity. Another reason is transportation and communication. So it has become very easy now, right? We've heard of the term global market. Now that global market is no longer far reach that is as it used to be. So now we have an opportunity to communicate easily through the internet and other mediums, telecommunication mediums. Now we have transportation operating on a more increased um, with more increased movement. So we have ships coming in, to our ports almost every 2 weeks. We have flights coming in daily. So this has allowed us to open up more trading on a worldwide basis. And then we have access to wider variety of goods. Can you imagine if we did not import goods, what variety we may have to choose from? So that allows countries now to provide variety so that consumers have more options when they're purchasing, and that, of course, improves their standard of living. Political connections can also be created. So we see, like in Grenada's case, we create political ties with countries like China, Cuba, the USA, all due to trading, right? Whether it be goods or services. And sometimes, again, we see that the goods are cheaper. So imported goods, right, may not always be the better quality or better in terms of the benefit to us, but the cost of it to the business can be cheaper, which transfers to a cheaper price to the consumer. Foreign exchange is also gained when we trade. right? So if we are exporting our goods or services, that money that we earn, which is foreign exchange, can be used to pay for any imports. Now it's important that there is a balance here, and balance in the sense that what you collect from your exports must be more than enough to pay for your imports so that you have surplus, right? But oftentimes we find countries experiencing a problem where the imports are way high above what is imported. Then we have foreign direct investments being allowed. So in Grenada and many Caribbean countries, we've heard about citizenship by investment, where foreign companies are allowed to make investments in those countries with these programs, and that has allowed countries to open the doors to more international trading and also more um, foreign exchange being gained, right? And of course, when we look at direct investment, we'll see also some of the benefits and some of the problems that come with it. All right, so there are advantages to international trade, some of which we already mentioned. All right, so I'm going to touch those that I did not include in the reasons because some of the reasons can also be advantages. So, in terms of advantage, we have increased utilization of productive capacity for export. So, we actually open more opportunities here for the country to export our goods as we create more ties with other countries, as we bring in more resources that we need that we can actually use to produce. So we may need certain materials which allows us to be productive and use other resources that we have to produce and therefore export. Employment is also created because at all levels we see jobs being created. So at the productive stage we see jobs being created. At the transportation stage we see jobs being created. Communication jobs being created. So that is also a plus. And I mentioned already that standard of living is improved as we have more access to these goods, and also um, because we are accessing more quality goods, we tend to see that level of competition pushing the level of innovation of the local goods, because now that they're competing with imported goods, right, you tend to find that they now have to improve on what they're offering so that the locals would buy their product. That, of course, could also pose a disadvantage because if imported goods are coming in at a better quality and cheaper rate, then our local funds will not be protected, right? And oftentimes we find consumers, we choose the imported goods that are cheaper and probably different quality, better looking, etc. And the local goods suffer, right, from lack of sales. Dumping of goods, another disadvantage. So sometimes the goods that we get may not necessarily be quality goods. Sometimes it's not even the standard that is allowed in the country where it was produced. So some developed countries have higher standards for what is accepted, and sometimes these goods that they produce are not um, you know, are below their standards and could be affecting us, in many ways, health wise, etc. Or even, pollution. I mentioned the example with the purchasing of vehicles from countries like Japan and so, right? Used vehicles. So from what I understand, this is not naturally factual, but from what I understand, mentioned is that some of these vehicles are not allowed to be used because of the age and the impact on pollution. So that's because of the standard in these countries, and they're trying to reduce pollution. But these products are coming here at very cheap rates, as we see, than what we may be able to buy it here at a used price. And that is some level of dumping in a sense, because again we are taking on the impact to our environment being polluted, right? So we have to look at all the factors. underdeveloped local industries. So again, international trade can stifle our local industries that are underdeveloped, and it doesn't give them a chance to fully develop, right? So this links with point one again. All right, so we understand why countries trade and how they decide and the impact it can have. Now we're looking now at the recording of these trading transactions. So just like how private sector businesses take records of all their transactions, right, in their accounting, just the same, the country has to do the same to know exactly what sort of trading transactions occur within a given period. So from a public sector point of view, we call these records balance of payments, right? So it is basically a statement showing trading between country and other countries, right? And that takes into consideration, when I say the country, it takes into consideration individuals trading, businesses trading, and government trading, right? So any sort of trading that takes place within a country in a given year, that is compared with trading done outside of the country, meaning exporting, importing, and that is recorded to give an idea of the balance, right, between those two figures. So there are three components of the balances of payments account, and this is the current account, the capital account, and the official financing account, right? The current account basically records all your exports and imports, which include visible, which is your goods, your merchandise. So if you're trading cocoa, nutmeg, spices, fish, those are visible trade, right? Any goods that are being traded are called visible trade. Those are the merchandise. So that is found in your current account. And then you have the invisibles, which would be your services. So yes, we do trade services, so that is also recorded, right, in this statement. The next account is the capital account. This one takes into consideration all capital flows. So any investment made, foreign investment, any loans, right, which is financial investment again, and from the banking aspect, any banking capital investment made, all those investment capital investment flows are recorded in your capital account. Now, of course, you're not expected to create this account, right? Because we're not doing accounting, but you are to understand what each account entails, right? The only minor calculation you would find is for the current account, and I'll show you how that is done. Normally, you see that on the multiple choice. I'm not sure if this year they may bring it due to the change in the syllabus, but I'm going to show you how that is done. The last section of the balance of payment is called the official financing account, and this comes about after you figure out what your balance is. So if your balance is a surplus, meaning you've made more from the trading you've done, like what we call profit in a private sector case. So in this case, we call it surplus. So profit, surplus, same thing, but we're looking at public sector versus private sector, right? In terms of the accounting. Um, and then if the balance is not positive or favorable, we call it a deficit, right? So this account is going to tell you how are you going to deal with this balance, whether it's a surplus or deficit. How are you going to finance it, right? All right. So I mentioned there is a little calculation involved. So in your current account, you calculate the visible trades and the invisible trades, right? So balance of trade, right, is going to be the sum of the values for your imports and exports, right? So balance of trade is for the visible, right? So visible exports first, because export mean money is coming in. So you start with the inflows. So export is always the first figure to add. So you put 24,000 and you minus imports because imports is money that you're spending, so that's going out of the country, and you get a balance. So because exports were less than imports, you have a negative figure of $2,000, right? 24 minus 26 gives you a negative 2,000, and this is recorded in millions, so that's why there's an M here. All right, so $2,000 million deficit, right? Because the country traded more in imports than exports. Then we have the invisible trade balance, which is the same formula basically, your exports minus your imports. In this case, we see that we had $20,000 exports, so way more than the imports. So that gives us a positive or favorable balance of 5,000 million, right? So that is how those two are done. So we have a deficit balance of trade, but a surplus invisible trade balance. So these two figures now are put together to get your total current account balance. Alright. So negative 2,000, which is the balance of trade for visible, plus the 5,000 would give you positive 3,000. Alright. So of course 5,000 is greater than 2,000. So mathematically you will end up with $3,000, which is a surplus. So overall, the balance of trade, the current account balance, sorry, which is based on the sum of your balance of trade and invisible balance of trade, will tell you your current account balance. And in this example, it's a positive number, which is favorable, and you get a surplus, right? Alright, so based on the calculation there, we see if exports exceed imports, you're going to get a surplus or a favorable balance of trade. On the other hand, if your imports exceed or is greater than your exports, there will be a deficit or unfavorable balance of trade. And of course, what do countries want? We want surplus. Right? This surplus can help the country to develop and grow economically, increase standard of living, help with poverty and unemployment and these other social issues. So every country is striving to have surplus balance of payments at the end of every period. Right, so this here again is facts on the difference between balance of payment deficit and balance of payment surplus. Remember I said balance of payment includes more than one account. So what I've shown you in the calculation was just one account, which is the current account balance. We do not do the entire thing because of how much it involves, right? So in terms of the balance of payment, you'll get a deficit when countries import more than they export in goods, services, and capital. Because remember, we're looking at all accounts here, right, including the investment of capital. If countries borrow, right, of course, when they have deficits, sorry, they have to borrow from countries to help pay for their inputs because they are already in a deficit. So you find that these countries tend to take loans now to try to help recover and pay for some of the expenses. In the short term, you may see some economic growth because, of course, you're spending, goods are being available, so you may see some economic growth. But in the long term, it will lead to more debt for that country. So it's not good for the long term. Right? Balance of payment surplus means you're exporting more than you're importing. Of course, the country here now has enough capital, and that could actually allow it to increase on the domestic production. Now, a surplus is very good for economic growth in the short term, and in the long run, it could lead to economic growth. But of course, the country has to be careful about its spending, right? And ensuring that exports lead to growth, right? So there must be a balance, which is why government is put in place to monitor the the balance between imports and exports to make sure that they are contributing to growth and development. Right, grants and gifts. So sometimes you may not be able to borrow a whole lot in terms of what you need, because when you borrow, you have to meet certain criteria. So you may also seek grants, which is money that you don't have to repay, to help with that situation. Rescheduling of your debt. Now, sometimes you may not be able to pay your debt because of the deficit. So remember the situation with Grenada and the stadium and Taiwan. We were not able to pay our debt and we had some issues there. So one of the things you'll have to do once that comes up is to reschedule. Also, you see what happened with COVID, persons who had loans at banks. You saw that the banks had to give people, that opportunity to reschedule the debt so that they're not going to face problems. Just the same, right? So rescheduling your debt means you're going to come up with new or different terms that would allow you to go through that period of your deficit. Importing on credit. Of course, you have to get permission from the country to do so, but sometimes you may have to take the goods on credit until you can pay. Right? Right. So this is some information in terms of Grenada and our financing as that's a 2019, of course. So I mentioned just now that we get loans from some of the institutions. We see World Bank 5.1 million in loan, and CDB, which is regional, 2.2 million. That's Caribbean Development Bank. And then they have other there. I'm not sure what the other is. The budget might be able to break that down. 3.1, so 10.4 million in loans in 2019. Then we had grants of 82.2 million. So luckily we had more grants than loans, right, to help finance our capital expenditure. All right, so what happens when countries have a balance of payment surplus, which is a good thing now, favorable? They can now lend money to other countries. Of course, countries lend money to other countries because they have surpluses. All right, so that's one. You can purchase assets, so you can now purchase. You can make investment like buy shares in companies, that may be good for you. Um, Especially countries companies, sorry, that is considered essential. So like Grenada situation where we'd have sold off Greenleg shares, majority shares, and now we're looking to purchase that back. Well, I think that was the solution. So you can use your reserves now from your surplus to purchase assets, whether locally or overseas. You could increase your reserves, so now you can divert more money to reserves. Debts can be paid. You can invest the surplus, and you can give grants to other countries. I can't remember hearing Grenada give grants. Maybe during like natural disasters, when like Dominica, for instance. So Grenada might have given a grant to Dominica during that time. So there might be special cases when that happens, right? But because most regional countries are small or developed, we tend to see that the smaller undeveloped, well, developing ones um, tend to have a lot of deficit issues now and then. They may have surpluses for certain periods, so it's really about managing your reserves carefully, knowing when to sell certain assets, knowing how to invest, and balancing the whole flow, and trying to get more opportunities for grants that could help with the issues that come up. Right. So Grenada had total grants 98.1 million 2019, 15.9 million budgetary grants, 82.2 million capital grants. Yeah, so that's some of the things that we benefit from. All right, so how do you finance a balance of payments? Remember, we said the financing account tells you basically how to deal with the problem, right? So if you have a deficit, then it means that you need to earn more. So you're going to increase your exports. So how can you increase your exports? Of course, you need to give incentives and subsidies to local businesses who are manufacturing to kind of help push them now to create more, right? Because the production comes from the local businesses or the businesses within that country. So by government offering incentives and subsidies to help cover some of the costs, they can now be pushed to manufacture more and help us produce more. Encouraging foreign investment, and I mentioned the investment program that government has to bring in more foreign investors in Grenada, and we see that picking up a lot. Almost, we have many foreign investment projects happening within a given year. Extending credit facilities. Of course, remember funding is a big issue when it comes to business and producing. So, by extending loan opportunities to businesses, that could help to for them to produce more, and therefore we can export more. Reducing spending. Now, government also have to look at managing their spending, right? So that we can have reserves, right? And also we can divert some of that into more productive measures that would help to export. Then we have improving marketing skills and sponsoring exhibitions. Now, for the last couple of years, we've seen a lot of improvement or activity in the tourism sector in terms of exhibitions and marketing. We need all day. Of course, the reason being we focus a lot on tourism. That's one of our main industries, which may not be the best, but that is what we have as what we invest in, right, to bring in most of our, our reserve or income, sorry, right, or inflows. So the areas that you export, you have to find ways to market them better and have exhibitions. So like farmers, I know almost annually we have exhibitions of products made in Grenada. I think they normally do that around Independence time. And you may have other things, yeah, that try to get our local manufacturers better marketed. Devalue the local currency. Now, this one is very technical. Remember who manages the currency? That is central bank. And one of the things they can do is actually devalue it, right? Remember, a currency's value is pegged to another currency, mainly the US. So let's say the EC 1 US is 2.6719. Now, if you want to devalue your currency, it means that you have to get more EC to 1 US. So you might find, let's say, if EC was devalued, you might have 4 EC to 1 US. And basically, what that means, it causes us to experience more cost when we import. So it's more expensive to import now. So that will reduce people's spending on imports. But it makes it very cheaper for us to export. So if a person in a US country have to buy goods from Grenada on an export basis, it will cost them, you know, cheaper because $1 in their currency, US meaning, is worth $4 in our currency. So it allows them to get more goods than opposed to half of that, which is the value right now. So sometimes you find the currency is devalued. I always mention Trinidad in this case. I'm not sure if that was one of the strategies in terms of the currency value being way lower. We know that their currency, in terms of peg to the US, is 1 US is about 6.20. But we see that there's a lot of exporting from that country, right? So it makes exporting very cheaper, and that will bring greater opportunities for that country where others will trade with them. Right, so to finance your balance of payment problems, you also need to spend less, meaning reduce your imports. So if you want to reduce your imports, one thing government can do is tax imports more, and we call that tariffs or duties, custom duties. Right? So if people know they have to pay more custom duties, they'll import less and try to look at probably creating the good themselves, especially if it's more cost effective to do so. You also have quotas, which is a limit on the amount you can import. So government can say you can only bring in this amount into the country. So that's a physical restriction on the amount that you can bring in into a country. Also, we have license. We talked about import license. So that again can restrict imports. If you don't have an import license or you're not granted one, then you cannot import. All right. We know that there are some goods that are banned. So again, we could have contraband goods or embargo set up so that no trading can take place. That again can help probably reduce some of the importing. Um, and we talked about devaluing the currency already. That makes importing very expensive, so it's going to discourage it. Right? And then we have foreign exchange control, which limit the amount of foreign currency available to individuals. Yes, so government can put restrictions on the amount of foreign currency that you should have available. And we see that all the time. I remember like traveling, you have limits on how much foreign currency you should have. Um, because of course, this links to your spending. Right? So once there are limits, then it limits your spending. All right, so this is just some data on Grenada in terms of imports, and one of the reasons why we experience some periodical, not consistent, but periodical deficits is because of the importing. Right, we tend to import a lot. So in 2017, January to June, we had $512.5 million worth of importing. And we see a heavy amount in machinery and transport, which tend not to be bad because that helps, that is necessary for production, right? But food is very high, second highest. And I believe that that is one area that can be reduced if we are more productive in terms of producing locally. And we see in 2018 again it jumped, so 626.2 million. The last section there just shows you the change between the two periods, right? How the difference between the two. So 2018 had an update, and I think from the last report, 2019 was even high, right? So one of our problem is that we import a lot, and this was taken for 2018 exporting. This shows the percentages of goods that we export, agriculture wise, of course. And this is exporting on a manufacturing level. So these are all some of our main manufacturing goods. So you can always check out the budget to see some of Grenada's situation. But the main concept, since we're looking at preparing for multiple choice, we look at some of the main concepts in terms of international trade, absolute advantage, comparative advantage. Then you look at balance of payment, surplus, balance of payment deficit, balance of trade. Alright, these are some of the terms that you should pay mind to. So I'm going to send this your way, and any other material that can help you. Any questions that you have, you can check the various platforms that we have. Go through your past papers again over and over to get familiar with these questions, and to also target any area that you're unprepared for so that you can get clarity. All right, see you. All the best.